One of the first things you'll notice about a Hallyu woman is her emotional self-control. It's not just that she keeps her cool in public. It's that she doesn't let chaos on the outside disrupt her peace on the inside. There's a quiet power in the way she carries herself. She's not easily rattled, not because she's detached, but because she's deeply rooted. In a world that teaches women to overreact, to over-apologize, to over-explain, she chooses a different path. She listens more than she speaks. She observes before she responds, and when she does speak, it's intentional. There's no scrambling for validation, no weaponizing silence, no dramatizing disagreement. She doesn't confuse emotional intensity with emotional intimacy, and that distinction sets her apart. What most people miss is that emotional self-control isn't about pretending not to feel. It's about honoring your emotions without letting them hijack your behavior. It's the difference between feeling angry and becoming anger, between being hurt and weaponizing that pain. The high-value woman understands that emotional intelligence isn't just knowing what you feel. It's knowing what to do with what you feel. So when someone disappoints her, she doesn't retaliate. She doesn't spiral into proving her worth or trying to change them. She steps back. She reflects. She evaluates whether this situation aligns with her values. And if it doesn't, she removes herself, not to teach someone a lesson, but to honor her peace. That's discipline. That's self-respect. And it's rare. Why is this so powerful in love and relationships? Because emotional chaos is exhausting. When someone is always triggered, always reactive, always seeking a response, they become emotionally expensive. And people, whether they say it or not, feel that. The high-value woman, on the other hand, offers emotional safety, not because she's perfect, but because she's stable. You can disagree with her and she won't explode. You can speak your truth and she won't punish you with silence. She's not here to control you. She's here to understand you and decide accordingly. And the truth is, emotional self-control is what allows you to hold boundaries without becoming bitter, express pain without blame, to stay open but not overly available. When you master that, you stop engaging in unnecessary battles. You don't defend yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't beg for respect where it's not freely given. You recognize that your energy is too sacred to be thrown around carelessly, but make no mistake, this kind of strength is not natural for most. It's earned. It's developed through reflection, through heartbreak, through years of emotional pattern breaking. It comes from sitting with your triggers long enough to understand what they're teaching you. It comes from learning how to self-soothe rather than outsource your healing. It comes from choosing long-term peace over short-term ego wins. That's the work most people avoid, but it's the very thing that makes a woman unforgettable. You see, emotional self-control doesn't silence you. It sharpens you. It makes your words carry weight, your presence feel safe, and your decisions routed in clarity, not impulse. And in relationships, that changes everything. It invites depth instead of drama. It creates space for truth instead of tension. It signals to everyone around you that you are not here to play games. You are here to grow, to love, and to be respected. So if you're serious about becoming a high-value woman, start with your emotions. Start by noticing what triggers you and why. Start by creating that pause between what you feel and how you act, because in that pause, you reclaim your power. And that power, that's what makes you unshakable. Remember, your emotional state is your responsibility, not your partner's, not the world's. And once you take ownership of it, you stop reacting to life and start leading it. That is where true value begins. A high-value woman doesn't just know who she is. She embodies lit. There's no performance, no need to overcompensate, no urge to prove her worth through roles, titles, or appearances. Her self-worth is not on trial, and because of that, she moves differently. She carries herself with a sense of certainty that doesn't demand attention. It simply commands it. Quietly, powerfully. See, when you genuinely know who you are, when you're rooted in your values, your passions, your non-negotiables, and your vision, it changes the way you show up in every room. You're not scanning for validation. You're not adapting to fit into spaces that weren't designed for your growth. You're not available for every opinion, every invitation, or every man who shows interest. Because you've already made the most important decision a woman can make. You've chosen yourself. And that self-knowledge isn't superficial. It's not based on trends, likes, or follower counts. It's internal. It's earned through solitude, through reflection, through having the courage to look at yourself honestly. It's knowing what brings you joy beyond being desired. It's knowing your standards in relationships that go beyond chemistry. It's being able to say, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and I won't shrink to be chosen. A woman who knows herself is not afraid to be misunderstood. She's not trying to water down her personality to avoid intimidating others. She doesn't interpret rejection as a reflection of her value. She sees it as redirection, an opportunity to realign with who and what is truly meant for her. That's the thing most people don't understand. Clarity breeds confidence. When you're unclear about who you are, you're more susceptible to settling. But when your identity is solid, your boundaries become clear, your time becomes precious, and your peace becomes non-negotiable. Let's be honest, this is rare because most people spend their lives becoming what others expect them to be. They chase approval. They chase relationships. They chase a version of success that looks good from the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. And then they wonder why they feel disconnected, exhausted, and unseen. But the high-value woman, she doesn't say chase. She attracts because her energy says, I don't need you to complete me. I'm already whole. And wholeness is magnetic. There's something undeniably attractive about a woman who is fully at home in herself. She's not performative. She doesn't overshare just to bond. She doesn't give to earn her place. She shows up fully, but selectively, intentionally. And in doing so, she raises the energetic bar for anyone who wants access to her world. This is not arrogance. It's alignment. It's what happens when you build your identity from the inside out instead of the outside in. And it's not just attractive. It's freeing. Because once you stop bending for validation, you start standing in truth. You speak more clearly. You walk more boldly. You choose more wisely. And in relationships, that changes everything. You don't need to convince someone of your worth. They feel it the moment you walk into the room. That kind of woman, anchored, authentic, self-defined, is unforgettable. Not because she's the loudest, not because she's trying to be seen, but because she's already connected to herself. And when a woman is deeply connected to herself, people naturally want to connect with her. So if you're on the journey to becoming high value, don't start with how others perceive you. Start with how you perceive you. Who are you when no one's watching? What do you believe about yourself when no one's affirming you? What do you stand for when it costs you something to stand alone? Because the answers to those questions, that's where your power lies. And once you claim that, everything else aligns because the world doesn't respond to who you pretend to be. It responds to who you are and how boldly you're willing to be her. A high-value woman doesn't just manage her emotions. She protects them. Not in a defensive way, but in a deeply intentional way. She understands that her emotional energy is currency. And like any valuable resource, it needs boundaries, not just access. Let's be clear. This isn't about becoming detached or unavailable. It's about knowing what deserves your emotional investment and what simply doesn't. And this distinction is what sets her apart. She doesn't entertain drama just to be polite. She doesn't absorb someone else's chaos out of guilt. And she's not emotionally available to every person who shows up with a sob story or a sweet smile. She listens to her gut. She evaluates the cost. And then she decides, not reacts. Less impossible, where maturity comes in. Because anyone can be reactive. Anyone can be pulled into someone else's emotional storm. But it takes a woman of substance to stay grounded in her own center, especially in relationships. A high-value woman understands that just because she can empathize with someone doesn't mean she's responsible for fixing them. She knows the difference between compassion and codependency, between love and self-abandonment. This is where a lot of women, especially those with big hearts, get caught up. They mistake overextension for love. They think giving more will earn them more. But the truth is, emotional overgiving often comes from fear, not love. Fear of losing someone, fear of being rejected, fear of not being enough unless you're constantly proving your worth. And that fear leads to burnout, resentment, and confusion because you're pouring from a place of depletion, not overflow. But when a woman reclaims her emotional energy, something profound happens. She becomes the anchor, not the storm. Her calm becomes contagious. Her presence becomes grounding. People can feel that she's not easily swayed by moods or manipulation, and that commands respect. She no longer chases after closure, over-explains her boundaries, or performs for approval. Her emotional clarity becomes her quiet superpower. Now, don't mistake this for being cold or detached. A high-value woman is deeply connected to her emotions, but she doesn't let them control her. She processes, reflects, and responds from a place of alignment. She doesn't text out of panic. She doesn't argue to be right. And she doesn't engage to soothe someone's ego at the expense of her own peace. That's not detachment. That's discernment. And this discernment leads to emotional sovereignty, where your peace isn't held hostage by someone else's behavior. That's powerful because it means you can love someone without losing yourself. You can forgive without re-entering toxic cycles. You can be kind without being a doormat. And you can be emotionally open without being emotionally available to everyone. This level of emotional intelligence takes practice. It takes unlearning the idea that love requires sacrifice of self. It takes letting go of the narrative that your value is tied to how much you endure. And it takes learning how to sit with your own emotions first, so you're not constantly outsourcing your sense of stability to other people's responses. So if you want to become a high-value woman, start paying attention to what drains you, who leaves you feeling scattered, anxious, or small. What situations pull you into emotional survival mode? That's where your boundary belongs, not as a wall to keep people out, but as a filter to protect your peace. Because the truth is, your emotional energy sets the tone for every interaction you have. And when it's protected, you move through the world with clarity and quiet strength. Here's the final truth. The most powerful woman in any room isn't the lewdest, the prettiest, or the most agreeable. She's the one who chooses where her energy goes and refuses to spend it on things that don't grow her. That kind of woman doesn't just walk into a room. She changes the temperature of it. And if you want to be unforgettable, protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. One of the most striking things about a high-value woman is that she's not performing. She's not adjusting her tone, personality, or presence to earn approval. She's not trying to be liked. She's focused on being respected. And that shift in energy changes everything. Now, let's be honest. Many of us were conditioned early on to make ourselves more palatable, to soften our truth, to please, to make others comfortable, even when it cost us our authenticity. We were taught that being liked is a currency. But what they don't tell you is that chasing likability will bankrupt your sense of self. A high-value woman has outgrown that game. She understands that being universally liked often means being universally forgettable. Because the more you dilute who you are to fit other people's comfort zones, the less you stand out. And more importantly, the less you stand in your own truth. She knows her value doesn't come from being agreeable. It comes from being aligned. This doesn't mean she's rude. It doesn't mean she's closed off. It means she's no longer sacrificing her standards or voice for a temporary sense of belonging. She doesn't laugh at jokes that offend her. She doesn't pretend to be low maintenance just to seem easygoing. And she certainly doesn't shift into someone she's not just to hold someone's attention. Her worth is not up for negotiation, and people can see that in how she carries herself. Here's the deeper layering. This kind of self-respect is magnetic. Because while likability is surface level, self-respect is energetic. It's rooted in boundaries, not bravado. It's the quiet confidence of a woman who knows who she is. So she's not waiting on outside validation to feel seen. And ironically, that very posture draws people in, not because she's trying to impress them, but because she's fully expressed in her own skin. When a woman no longer fears being misunderstood, she becomes powerful. She can say no without guilt. She can walk away without creating drama, and she can hold space for both compassion and clarity. That's the paradox of presence. You don't have to raise your voice or shrink your standards. When you own your truth, your energy does the talking. Less impossible. Think about the women who've left a mark on you, not because they were the lewdest in the room, but because they carried themselves with a quiet strength. They didn't need to beg for attention or over-explain their choices. They stood tall in who they were. That kind of woman lingers in memory long after she's left the room. But getting there requires inner work. It means doing the uncomfortable task of separating your self-worth from other people's opinions. It means getting honest about the areas where you still seek approval and asking yourself, am I living to be liked or am I living to be true? You don't need to be everyone's favorite. You need to be your own standard. That doesn't mean you won't care for people or form deep, meaningful connections. It means those connections won't come at the cost of your core. You'll attract people who align with your values, not your performance. So here's the real invitation: stop shrinking, softening, or silencing parts of yourself to be digestible. Start choosing self-respect over popularity, not just in your romantic life, but in every space you enter. Speak with intention. Dress for yourself. Own your story, even the messy parts. And remember, being liked is a fleeting reward. But self-respect, that's a legacy. There's a difference between presence and pursuit. A high-value woman knows the difference, and she never confuses the two. She isn't chasing attention, affection, or approval. Her energy says, the second feels impossible. I'm already whole. That's where her magnetism comes from, not because she's doing too much, but because she's doing just enough with intention, not desperation. Effortlessness isn't about doing nothing. It's about letting go of force. It's about knowing that the right things, especially in love, don't require you to contort yourself to be chosen. When a woman shows up with calm, routed energy, it communicates that she's not performing for love. She's inviting it. And that invitation is felt, not forced. Desperation, on the other hand, leaks. It shows up in the subtext, the over-texting, the over-explaining, the anxiety masked as being available. It's the underlying message of, please notice me. Please choose me. Please see that I'm worthy. But the moment your worth is tied to someone else's response, you've handed your power over. A woman who is emotionally secure doesn't chase. She's already living a life full of meaning, rhythm, and richness. Her attention is a privilege, not a plea. That doesn't mean she's indifferent. It means she's selective. It means her world doesn't stop spinning because someone hasn't replied. Her self-esteem isn't on pause waiting for validation. What's powerful here is that effortless signals internal wholeness. When your identity isn't built on external affirmation, you stop grasping and start attracting. You start showing up from a place of curiosity instead of control. You don't feel the need to prove your worth or audition for affection. You trust that the right person will see you clearly without having to overcompensate. This doesn't mean you suppress emotion. It means you express without attachment. You can say how you feel without expecting it to change someone else. You can love deeply without needing it to be mirrored immediately. That emotional detachment, not from your truth, but from the outcome, is one of the highest expressions of self-respect. Let's talk practically. The woman who embodies effortlessness is in flow. She moves through her day with grace because she's centered in herself. She doesn't panic when someone pulls back. She doesn't spiral into self-doubt because a relationship didn't fold to hope. She doesn't dramatize delays, hosting, or silence. She interprets them as data, feedback, not failure. And with that, she pivots with poise. People are drawn to ease. They gravitate toward the person who isn't trying so hard to be needed, liked, or validated. And when a man senses that you're not seeking completion through him, it creates a different dynamic. One where respect is built, not begged for. One where interest grows, not out of pressure, but out of curiosity. You see, desperation clouds discernment, but effortlessness creates clarity. And that clarity is what allows you to walk away from what isn't aligned. Not with bitterness, but with peace. That's the kind of emotional maturity that can't be faked. It's developed over time through the unlearning of patterns, the quiet recalibration of your nervous system, and the choice again and again to show up for yourself, not just others. You become unbothered because you've learned to trust yourself. You've learned possible that you don't have to overextend to keep someone. You've realized that the right energy never needs to be chased. And from that place, your presence speaks louder than any performance ever could. So let's be clear, effortlessness is not laziness. It's not passivity. It's not detachment in disguise. It's inner peace made visible. It's the outcome of a woman who knows what she brings to the table and isn't afraid to eat alone when the vibe's not right. That woman doesn't get overlooked. She gets remembered. There's something profoundly magnetic about a woman who knows her worth, and in theory, not as a mantra, but as a lived, felt truth. You can see it in her posture, hear it in her tone, and sense it in how she makes decisions. She's not trying to prove she's enough. She's knows she is. That certainty shapes everything, her boundaries, her presence, her energy. Now, when we talk about knowing your worth, we're not talking about arrogance or ego. We're talking about alignment with your values, your peace, your vision. A woman who's aligned doesn't chase confusion. She doesn't negotiate with disrespect. And she certainly doesn't shrink herself to fit into someone else's version of love. She doesn't abandon herself in the name of connection. She stands rooted, and the world adjusts around that energy. Knowing your worth means you no longer confuse silence for strength. It means you don't romanticize inconsistency. You stop trying to win over people who are undecided about you. Because when you recognize that your presence is not just valuable, but sacred. You no longer tolerate environments that don't honor that truth. This is the shifting from being available to everyone to being intentional with your access. High value doesn't mean high maintenance. It means high awareness. And with that awareness comes discernment. You're not entertained by empty words anymore. You're not swayed by surface level attention. You've learned to wait for depth, for effort, for energy that matches yours. Not because you're playing games, but because you've done the work, you've healed, you've grown, you've recalibrated your nervous system to peace instead of chaos. And that changes everything. A woman who knows her worth doesn't chase chemistry. She chooses compatibility. She doesn't settle for being someone's maybe when she knows she's meant for certainty. This is where she becomes unshakable, not because life doesn't challenge her, but because her self-respect isn't up for negotiation anymore. She's had the conversations with herself that no one saw. She's had the quiet breakdowns, the self-doubt, the healing, and now she moves differently, not louder, just deeper. The beautiful irony. When a woman carries herself like this, people ludo notice. Men notice. They notice the lack of needness, the emotional regulation, the way she doesn't flinch at the lack of attention because her validation is internal. She's not reacting. She's choosing. And that level of self-possession is rare. It commands respect without ever demanding it. Now, here's the deeper truth. Knowing your worth isn't a destination. It's a practice. Life will test it. People will test it. Old patterns will whisper, maybe just this once. But every time you chores yourself over settling, that knowing gets stronger. Every time you walk away from what drains you, that belief becomes conviction. You don't just know your worth, you embody it. And in love, that's everything. Because a woman who knows her worth doesn't beg for loyalty. She doesn't plead for clarity. She doesn't ask to be prioritized. She expects it, not from entitlement, but from self-honor. She doesn't need to convince anyone of her value. She's not trying to be chosen. She's already chosen herself. And that's the woman who becomes unforgettable, not because she's loud, but because she's clear. So if you've ever wondered why some women seem to move through love without losing themselves, this is it. They're not better. They're just anchored. They've stopped outsourcing their value. And they've realized that being chosen means nothing if you have to abandon yourself to stay. Let that be the standard. Because when you truly know your worth, you stop asking for tables that weren't built for you, and you start building your own quietly, powerfully, without apology,